Welcome to the C-Suite podcast from ICE here in Barcelona, the place where the world of gaming comes to do business. My name is Graham Barrett, and I'm delighted to say that we are once again collaborating with Sumsub and their What the Fraud podcast, producing the show from their booth here on the expo floor. Now we are handing over presenting duties to Kris Galloway, iGaming Product Evangelist at Sumsub. Kris, great to see you here at the event. Looking forward to the conversations today.
I really am. Yeah, we've got a fantastic lineup of guests. We have some incredible topics, so I can't wait to get stuck in.
Excellent. Let's hear from our first guest.
So to kick things off, we're looking at one of the most watched markets on the planet right now, which is Brazil, a territory with massive opportunity, but a regulatory landscape that's still very much under construction. I'm joined by Daniel Xavier, COO at BetMGM Brazil. Daniel, thank you ever so much for coming onto the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're most welcome. So you're attending a panel tomorrow, I believe, which is titled Brazil in Play, the challenge of operating in a market under construction. Obviously, Brazil is an absolutely massive market. What would you say regulation has gotten spot on so far, and what is it that still feels unfinished?
Look, Brazil took a lot of time to regulate its market. So a long time, that is bad. But there's one thing good about it, that you could learn from best practice around the world. So we could understand what happened on each of other markets and could make a better regulation for ourselves. What I can tell is that our regulation is robust. I think it's good for the player. It creates a good layer of protection, responsible gaming. It's clear about the do's and the don'ts. The bad thing at the moment, I think that's the challenge for the next years, this year and the next maybe 1 or 2 years more, is the fight against the illegal market. It's still huge. So I had the numbers yesterday from H2 Capital. They just released a new research. Is about $3 billion.
Right.
28% of the market. So that's the next stage, I believe.
Yeah.
But the foundation is very good.
So you mentioned different templates that Brazil can copy from at the moment. What would you look to some of the, let's say, some of the templates in other regions that might have gotten it right so far? Are there any that jump out at you?
Yeah, I think that, for example, one that came right now in my memory is what happened with Netherlands, for example.
Yeah.
Netherlands started very good and started to raise taxes, and the legal market increased their share over the total. So Brazil started right. Tax is still in the discussion. We recently had an increase to 12% GGR to 15%. Each year increases 1%.
Right.
But it is still doable. It is still manageable.
Yeah.
And I think that there are very good parts about the do's and the don'ts, about KIC, about player protection, about responsible gaming, that we copied from the best practice around the world. That's what I'm saying,
Yeah, it feels like a very delicate balance in terms of what you do with taxes, what you take from other templates. What you mentioned 28%. It's very difficult, I think, to gauge exactly what that number is.
It's impossible.
Exactly. I mean, some industry reports suggest illegal operators account for up to 55% of revenue in some cases. Like you say, it's impossible to know exactly what that figure is. It's hard to verify. But directionally, I think it does tell a story. We also know that Brazil has a high crypto adoption rate, which makes payments faster and harder to trace. Does this make challenging the illegal market in Brazil harder than in most other regulated regions?
To be honest, I don't believe that we have a high usage of crypto in Brazil. The same research from H2 Capital shows that it's around 1% in crypto. Look, this is illegal because the legal only have just one option called PIX.
Yeah, of course.
It's like a direct transfer.
Yeah.
Brazil is in general around 91% of the GGR of the total market, legal and illegal, uses PIX.
Yeah.
So banking system in Brazil is very advanced and is very trackable, the source and the destination of the money.
Yeah.
So maybe we have a better understanding on the legal market as other countries do because of this PIX.
Absolutely.
High usage,
I mean, PIX, I think a lot of regions look at PIX as being quite revolutionary in terms of payments, which is great for Brazil. Yeah. Building on that, what would you say are some of the main fraud patterns that are most tied to the unlicensed ecosystem in Brazil? And which one of them worries you the most as we see the market maturing?
Okay, great question. Brazil is an easy country regarding fraud. Brazil is a huge country, 200 million people. They are used to find personal information over the internet and create dozens of accounts.
Yeah.
For bonus abusing, for other frauds.
Yeah.
So, but the regulation creates a very good foundation to avoid this to happen.
Right.
Of course, the operators would do it anyway, but
sure.
The need of a very sophisticated KYC process during the sign up. So you need to send ID, selfie. Yeah. You need to cross information with some bureaus. So it's very reliable today. Talking about the legal market, it's a very reliable process that guarantee that the real person is using the documents and the data. But before that, in the legal market, that used to be a problem.
Yeah, I can understand. And I think you've also addressed some of the ways that BetMGM is also tackling this in your answer as well. How vulnerable would you say the Brazilian iGaming market is to money laundering specifically? Not least because, as we know, money laundering within banking is becoming increasingly expensive. Do you think this makes iGaming in the Brazilian market more vulnerable?
I don't think so, because as I mentioned, the system, the platform, it's very robust, the KYC process, how we handle the information, the technology. And the bank system in Brazil is very advanced, so it's very trackable, the source and destination of the money. And regarding BetMGM in Brazil, you can imagine that MGM Resorts and Global, that is a joint venture between these two companies, they are extremely concerned about compliance, about governance. So they have the highest level of concern about that. So I don't think it's worth for money laundering to use the legal platforms, the legal operators for that. Maybe there is still space in the legal market for that.
That makes sense. What do you feel could be done at a governmental and educational level within the Brazilian market to ensure users understand and know the difference between a regulated and an unregulated operator and the risks that the unregulated operators carry?
Yeah. No, Brazil is a very different country from the others. The land-based casinos, they were banned from the country in 1946, and they are to the date. But people kept on gambling somewhere, some way.
Yeah.
But what happened? The public opinion about the market is very bad. It's like linked to illegal activity so far.
Yeah, of course.
And as a result, part of the people don't mind playing on illegal sites. So 23% of the players, of the people that this study is from H2, were asked whether they prefer legal or illegal, 20% don't mind.
Right.
Whatever. So there's a huge work to be done by the operators, by the government, by the associations to educate the population about the risks of the black market. So it will take time. We are just starting the year 2 of the regulation, so it's everything very new for everyone.
Yeah. It's interesting because we mentioned that there are lots of templates that Brazil can take from in terms of creating the regulation, but this feels like something that it's revolutionizing in the sense of actually educating people as to the dangers and the differences between illicit operators and the regulated operators. Looking forward and considering how unique the Brazilian iGaming landscape is, how do you expect the industry is going to evolve over the next few years? Looking at things like education, regulation that you mentioned, and
well, I feel very, very optimistic about the market, about Brazil, because I understand that this work about blocking the legal market will increase over the next years. This education will show how important it is to play. There is a league activity like anywhere else, and you can find the tournament by this websites. I think that the market will also grow over time. Maybe if you invite me in 4 or 5 years, I hope you do. If the audience likes me, I don't know. Who knows?
I'm sure they will.
So if you invite me 4 or 5 years from now, maybe you can have the double of the size of the market that is today.
Yeah.
I really believe it to happen because everyone, like as I said, it's new. Like you be in an open TV channel and say, play in BetMGM Brazil. You know, 5 years ago it was prohibited, so now it's
completely different.
So the market will grow. So I'm very optimistic about that.
I think one thing we'll need to do on the video version of this is put a "to be continued" subtitle so that we can pick up where we left off.
Let's do it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you ever so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's been very insightful.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
We often talk about fraud as a technical or illegal battle, but for an operator, it's a human one as well. You can't just keep adding checks. Every extra hurdle affects the customer experience and the conversion rate, as well as the overall journey. It's about finding the Goldilocks zone where the platform is secure, but the experience remains seamless. To get the operator's view on the balance, I'm joined by Andrew Wright, who's the Managing Director for UK and Ireland at LeoVegas Group. Andrew, welcome to the podcast.
Morning, thanks for having me.
Good morning, thank you for being here. So you're fresh off of the Future of Sports Betting panel. And I'd like to broach the same topic, but from the perspective of fraud. It is What the Fraud podcast, after all. How do you feel the World Cup in particular this year is going to threaten sports betting operators in ways that we haven't necessarily experienced in previous World Cups?
Yeah, it's a good starting point to say just off the panel. We talked a bit about from an operator's perspective, from an acquisition and retention point of view. The World Cup is unbelievably important for operators, once every 4 years, and it's the biggest show on earth. So. And I think this year is even heightened. There's more games than ever before. There are 100 games, more teams than ever before. And so actually the way we're thinking about it is maybe different to how we've done in the past. I think from a fraud point of view, obviously where the issues can arise is, of course, everyone's going to spend a lot of money on acquisition. There'll be a lot of acquisition offers, welcome bonuses, lots of bonusing of new customers as well. And so that creates an awful lot of opportunity for new accounts to be opened up that aren't perhaps the average person on the street that wants to have a bet on England v Panama or whatever it may be.
Absolutely.
It's a cracking opportunity, but of course we're thinking about it from the perspective of fraud as well as risk from maybe a trading perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you feel operators should be or should already have in place to combat these threats, or what should they be working on now to make sure that they're not caught out when it's too late?
Yeah, I mean, look, this has been an ongoing process for a long time now, but we're forever looking at behavioral flags to try and indicate, let's be honest, the long-term or the lifetime value of a customer, right? That's a lot of what we do. And obviously we're also looking at potential markers of harm from a safer gambling perspective.
Of course, yeah.
We've been honing, I suppose, these skills and building the muscle over many years of, if a customer joins up through a certain welcome offer, through a certain affiliate, does that make them more or less likely to have harmful play, to be fraudulent, to be a good customer? Well, their payment method, an indicator, or their postcode potentially. If there's a bot that's running multiple accounts, multi-accounting, but they might all come from the same pools of residents at a university. So there's lots and lots of indicators, even before they place their first bet, of the potential likelihood of it being fraudulent or valuable, right?
Of what their trajectory is going to be and what the LTV is.
Yeah.
And I imagine part of that is building a risk score based on some or all of those factors that you mentioned.
Yeah.
One of the other panels that LeoVegas attended was titled The Black Market Challenge. Do you feel as though most regulated operators lack the innovation that we see among offshore operators, or does regulation prevent them from competing at that product level?
Yeah, so it's a very really interesting question, actually. I think from my perspective now, if I think about my roadmap and I think about my colleagues, I've worked in this industry for 20 odd years, worked with some unbelievably brilliant people, and there's no shortage of ideas and innovation and how do we take things that work well in casino and bring them to sportsbook and vice versa, and look at e-commerce and how does Amazon do this and why can't we do that, etc. Right? There's loads and loads of great thinking as to how do we attract and retain customers. But if you then look at our roadmap and you say probably half of our roadmap for the next 6 months in the lead up to the World Cup is around regulatory or compliance tickets, and so lots and lots of thinking is there. But then equally, because obviously we're fully regulated and we're proud to be so, but there are things we simply have to have as P0s, let alone P1s, and like they simply have to be done for us to retain our license, protect the customers in the way that we think we should. I think when you're an unregulated space, forgetting whether you pay tax, yes or no, that just means you have more money to spend. But from an innovation perspective, you can purely focus. I'm not saying they all do this, by the way, but you could purely focus on features and giving, just making the product far more accessible, maybe far more enjoyable as well. So I don't think we're less innovative, but I think there's the pressures and the added workload that comes with being regulated, providing really safe play for customers can at times become a bit of a trade-off against cool, innovative new features.
No, that makes sense. So it's not just a product and innovation thing, it's also a capacity thing, considering how much you have to fit into a short space of time. And I imagine that space of time can be considerably shorter depending on when these features and requirements are announced at a regulatory level as well.
Absolutely.
So we see a broad range of unregulated industry statistics. Argel in France recently announced over 50% of revenue is black market, for example. UK reported a doubling from 2% to 4%. How accurate do you think these figures actually are?
I think LeoVegas operate in the Netherlands, and we're pretty confident that it'd be about 50% now unregulated to regulated in terms of from the industry, and that's since a big tax increase about 18 months ago in that country. Germany, well documented, it's about the same, probably 55% or so, and I think interestingly in that market, it sounds like the regulator is working really well with the operators to try and find ways, the regulated operators, to try and find ways to help the regulated operators bring a bit more of that business back into the regulated environment, which is fantastic. UK, very hard to know, right? Obviously the tax increase is coming. It's going to make things harder for the regulated industries we've talked about. But similarly, lots of the affordability checks and whatnot, which again rightly came in, but we're probably going back to 2021, 2022. I think some of the higher staking, higher turnover customers have already left for the unregulated market around that time. So they're inevitably over the next 12 to 18 months, as casino tax increases in the UK and then sportsbook in 2027 increases again. There'll be a movement to the black market for reasons we just talked about around innovation and whatnot. But similarly, and maybe I'm clutching at straws here, hopefully some of the move has already happened. Albeit we've all done this. If you Google best sportsbook in the UK, you're presented with a list of 10 sportsbooks which don't subscribe to GamStop and that sort of thing, and so immediately you're into into an interesting place.
Absolutely. One last question, if I may, in regards to money laundering. To what degree do you think the unlicensed operators slip through the cracks at a regulatory level? Are the regulators sort of focused predominantly on the regulated industry, making it very unfair considering you have so many unregulated operators slipping through the cracks? Or do you think there's a degree of recognition for the unlicensed operators from a money laundering perspective?
My gut feel would be the former. But similarly, if you think about the recent tax announcement, and there's £25 million has been allocated from that increased tax revenue to the Gambling Commission to try to clamp down and better, I suppose, regulate in air quotes the unregulated market. So hopefully that will help. And on this might be a bit sort of crude thinking about it in such commercial terms, but the government is now far more incentivized to clamp down on the unregulated market than it ever has been, because obviously the tax rates have near doubled. So fingers crossed that will make the gambling industry safer for all customers.
Absolutely. That's all my questions. Thank you ever so much for joining the podcast, and hopefully we'll be able to do more in future.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. iGaming fraud doesn't sit in a box anymore. It touches every part of a business, from payments and product design to how we fight unlicensed operators. To see where the industry is headed, you need the whole map. And to help me analyze that map, I have Adrianna Samuels, Vice President and Senior Client Partner for Gaming at Globant. Adrianna, thank you ever so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Let's kick off with the first question. What are some of the most worrying and hardest to tackle fraud threats within iGaming right now?
I guess the biggest one that is, I feel, is the fake accounts. So in my experience, I've had people take their grandparents, their elderly family members' information and game for the bonus abuses. It's insane.
It's something that sort of goes back to the 90s, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
I've heard stories of people sort of buying IDs from town folk in rural parts of China to serve these ends. It's terrifying.
It is terrifying, especially when it's someone close to you, like your grandparents, when it's family, because you have all the information.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's very simple.
I mean, I think there are two sides to this, I suppose. There's the industrial level bonus abuse and account fraud, and then there's the opportunistic side of things as well. How would you compare those two to each other? Which do you think can be the most worrying?
Most worrying is probably the folks that are taking their families, because it's really hard to gauge, right? You can scout IPs, you can verify the different tools that they're utilizing, the phones or the computers, but you can't really nail down if they're utilizing each other's IDs, right? Their information. So that's what's worrisome to me.
That makes sense. So over the past few years, we've seen. Actually, I want to say over the last decade or two, actually, if I'm not mistaken, we've seen a number of operators being fined for a wide range of violations. I won't give any examples.
Yeah.
Do you think these fines are enough to ensure that users are actually being protected, or could regulators be doing more in this sense, do you think?
That's a really heavy question.
It really is.
Because it depends on the operator you're talking about.
Yeah.
If you're talking about a tier 1 operator, it's like chump change to them. They don't care. It's the cost of doing business.
Yeah.
Right? So they're marketing and they're pushing for this clientele. So they're really not, those fines don't mean much.
Yeah.
However, when you're talking about the startups, that hurts.
Would it be a little bit too ambitious to suggest a dynamic policy in regards to fines based on where the operator is at in their journey?
I mean, I think that would be more fair. It would, because startups, again, they're just trying to make it, and they're competing against tier 1s, and it's very difficult to do.
Yeah.
So those fines hurt. They hurt the wallet.
I think there's a much deeper conversation to be had here, particularly in regards to regulation, especially in the US. It seems as though some of the regulation is actually prohibitive to new startups coming into the industry.
It's very difficult. The taxes, the licenses, it's really hard to be competitive.
It can be.
Yeah.
So let me ask you something a little bit different. I had a quick look at your LinkedIn.
Yeah.
If you had a time machine, questions that start with "if you had a time machine" are always great, aren't they? If you had a time machine which for some reason only went back to New Jersey in 2014 specifically, what would you tell the Adrianna Samuels, who was a senior fraud analyst at Bally Technologies, to prepare for in terms of fraud over the coming decade?
I would tell that Adrianna to focus on the partners that you brought into the operation, specifically in technology. I don't feel that we really thought about the technology that we were using. It was more speed to market.
Right. Yeah.
I think we could have done better choosing the right technology and building for success.
Do you think regulation would change that today? Because obviously regulation has come a long way since 2014. Do you think it puts a little bit more pressure on the operator to make sure they're getting the technology right? Or do you think it's still a speed to market issue?
I think when you're a startup, it's speed to market.
Yeah.
When you're growing in the business and you've been in the business for quite a bit, then it's about, okay, we're looking for the technology now because we want to bring it in-house. We want to utilize sticky features. We want to add more technology that's going to increase revenue, but also protect the business and the end consumer.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You've obviously worked in gaming and payments as well, if I'm not mistaken. Do you think payment providers could be doing more to support regulators and regulated industries? And if you do, why aren't they? What does that look like at the moment?
That's a tough question. I have worked in payments, but I think a lot of it has to do with the information they provide, the platforms.
Yeah.
So there's only so much information they can give.
Right.
Right. Because then you're crossing the lines of other legal laws. So I think you're kind of like stuck in a, what do they call, a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
So you can only provide so much information to the operators or the technology providers, and nobody wants to give too much information.
Right.
So it's a lot of manual work in order to protect the business.
It goes a lot deeper than people realize.
It really does. Yeah.
So staying on the theme of fraud, we're seeing more unlicensed operators pop up alongside grey market ones.
Yeah.
Some people assume it's as simple as identifying their domains and blocking them, but in practice, why is domain level blocking so hard to make effective, and what are its limitations as a disruption strategy?
I am definitely not a geolocation expert. By no means, but I do feel that it's very difficult to pinpoint, right? Because there's so many different bots and technology that actually hackers are utilizing in order to get where they want to get when they want to get to. If they want to get into a specific operator or they want to do something, they'll find ways around it.
Right. And what do you think, working in the US market, what do you think the US gets right to dissuade operators that the rest of the world really doesn't catch on to? Because obviously, I think if a illicit operator thinks about the US market, they steer well clear of it. So what is it that the US really gets right in that sense? Tough one, right?
I guess the first question is the U.S. getting it right?
Absolutely. Let's take a step back and look at it from that perspective. It's certainly doing something better than a lot of other countries.
Right. Regulatory, they're really strict. They're protecting end consumer, which I feel is they're doing that right.
Mm-hmm.
They're being really strict. And I think that it's a positive thing to protect the end consumer.
Of course. Yeah.
However, I think a lot of the licensing and the taxes and the way to do business is definitely something that should be reviewed, because you're not really getting operators that can come in and really put the money into the technology and to the ways to protect the fraud and so forth, because they're putting all this money in up front.
Do you feel, I won't ask how, I'll start with, do you feel there's a gap between the technology and the regulators' understanding of what can be achieved in terms of responsible gaming or in terms of anti-money laundering, or do you feel that there's still a lot there that can be learned from a regulatory perspective?
I think they could learn more. Right. I think regulators know what they want to see. I know they want to see these certain reports. They want certain like 1-800-GAMBLER on. They want to educate, right, and providing the customers clear definition of what's going on in their gaming experience. However, I do feel that they could learn more, and I feel like technology providers and even like AI experts and companies can really educate the regulators a little bit better to say, hey, listen, if operators were putting their revenue and their money into this technology to protect the business and to protect the end consumer, that is where you're going to really find the most value.
Perfect. That's it. That's all my questions. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Ever so much for joining us, and hopefully we'll be able to do it again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. From the liquidity side of iGaming, you get a different view of risk. It's not so much only about whether or not fraud exists, but how it affects financial stability, decision-making, and long-term confidence in an operator. To explore this perspective with me, I'm joined by Torben Friis, Managing Director at Match Liquidity. Torben, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So from the liquidity side of the industry, I imagine you see a very different risk profile. From an investor's perspective, when does fraud stop being an operational issue, and when does it start becoming an investment risk?
Well, the main thing for us as a provider in this, let's say, vertical, I must emphasize, we don't deal with iGaming operators directly. We deal with the service companies within their groups, which deal with marketing, IT, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But what we really see with this stuff is that a lot of these people, they don't really appreciate the necessity of having basic safeguards in place. Clear example is they might take the lowest level of screening that a company like Sumsub will offer, but they will not take the next level up, which will allow that to be integrated with a backend solution that will map the IP address consistency of that customer against subsequent activity. So they will perhaps go into something like a Sumsub solution that will KYC the customer. But funnily enough, that person is from, let's say, France, and that will go via France, but all the subsequent activity of that player's account is done out of India or I don't know, obvious VPN that is used by a provider out of Russia. And where we say to them, look guys, you don't have your house in order. So from a business point of view, when we talk to them, both as a provider but also as we are a proprietary trading firm originally, so we have a bit of money on the side, and we've given some of these companies a bit of money on the side to see what they could grow. We really have to educate them a lot. That's the sad truth.
No, that makes sense. And a shameless plug here, whereas you're saying if they'd gone that step further and taken on Sumsub's device intelligence, for example, then they'd be much more protected rather than just taking the approach of, we're ticking this box, this is done, this is the minimum we need to do.
Yeah, but that's because most of these businesses, they often have a reactive approach where they say, let's just tick some boxes, let's get some providers on board. If anybody comes and asks some question, we'll say we have Sumsub for compliance, crypto, we don't know how this works, so they will take the cheapest provider on the street like Crystal, and then they will get it going. And then when the shit hits the fan, they will come back to you and say, we need a open heart surgery, what kind of extra solutions do you have? Some might even be so cheeky and ask if you can backdate the invoices, and they'll pay you back until then, because they really just need a justification for that they have taken necessary measures.
Yeah, so it's not even a conscious prioritization issue, it's actually just not understanding the threats that are there and how to prepare for them, really.
I think a lot of them are conscious of the threats. They just choose from a commercial/risk point of view to say, why spend that money now? Why buy that car insurance? We'll just take the cheapest one out there. And then if there's a incident, we'll call the insurance agent and say, by the way, do you remember last week I told you to get the full insurance on the car, but I never received that in the mail. Is that in the process, right?
Partly terrifying, and it's
I'm afraid so.
Partly interesting. So other types of fraud you see as almost as an inevitable cost of business versus others that immediately raise questions about management quality?
Well, I don't believe there are any kinds of fraud that you would somehow condone and just say, well, that's the cost of doing business, because that's literally, we have to remember that fraud in its own right is a criminal activity. And although lawyers and judges will tell you that prosecuting and convicting for fraud is often difficult.
Of course, especially in this industry.
Yeah, indeed. The key thing is, we always tell these people, we at Match, we have been running a series of educational efforts. We had a long event with Scotland Yard, London Metropolitan Police, the head of the whole cybercrime section there. Jeff last year, top people from Chainalysis, one of the leading companies in the KYT space in the world. Therefore, their main person on the systems architecture, who was with the German FBI Bundeskriminalamt, and they were explaining that a lot of these businesses, if they would just take a more active role in preventing fraud at their user level early on, then they would stand a lot better. But many of them choose to take a reactive role rather than going into it at first because they want to save money.
Absolutely. It goes back to what you said at the beginning in regards to being preventative rather than reactive.
Correct.
So on the occasions that you do work with operators early on, what tells you or what signs are there that they genuinely do understand the risk exposure versus just ticking compliance boxes like we mentioned a moment ago? And are there any signals that you've learned to trust over time?
Well, one of the main ones, the main thing is we always ask, how understanding are these people of the routes that they are operating? So even though we have nothing to do with credit card processing, we are pure B2B treasury side of the industry that do first-party transfers back to relevant companies, banks, financial institutions, whatever. But the reality is we always ask them a simple vertical that we have nothing to do with, like credit cards. Please tell me, how is your credit card acquiring process right now? And then we will understand, how do they run this? And if they start talking about miscoding early on, we understand they have a very high risk profile in terms of risk tolerance. And that's the moment we will say, ooh, do we really want it? You're going back to, fraud or let's say negligence, where we're then, are these people appreciating what's going to happen next? And then the next step we take from that is we ask them, right, what safeguards do you have internally? For instance, as in any business, a company that sits on a lot of money, let's say an online operator or the technology arm of this entity, you tell us you've changed your bank accounts. But I don't know if one of your senior financial controllers have decided to go on holiday 2 weeks after they make the last transfer.
Right.
But the day before they make the transfer, he informs that you've changed bank accounts. And then he wires 5 million out to somewhere behind the moon.
Right.
You know? So this is the kind of stuff where we ask, what are your safeguards for this? So, and we often challenge people and say, look, you've just sent this across to us. You've now moved to a bank in Singapore.
Yeah.
You were always in Europe. We need a video call where this person is on the
Absolutely.
call. And if there can't be a video call, then we will halt the whole process until there's been a video call. We've even had incidents where we were like, you know, with AI these days, everything's possible.
I was just about to ask, is a video call enough these days?
Then we're going to say, look, there's only one thing to do. Who do we have as a trusted source nearby, you know? I personally have been in the financial industry for 26 years. So I can dial up people in over 100 countries in the world within a few hours.
Sure.
And I'll say to somebody, look, I need somebody on your team to go to that address, ring the doorbell, and tell me, and I'll send them a photo of the person, is this guy there?
Yeah.
And if he's not there, thank you very much. I owe you a lunch or dinner next time I'm in town, but you know, we're not going with that because you know, you can't dial it back afterwards.
Yeah.
Or you could try, but it's very cumbersome.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I had a couple of other questions here, but I think you've answered them so far with everything that we've discussed. Your answers have been so comprehensive. But let's just touch a little bit more on AI as a final question. Obviously, a lot of us are aware of how AI is impacting the operator side of things, the impact it has on multi-accounting, bonus abuse, money laundering, for example. On your side of the industry, what are the threats from AI there?
Artificial intelligence is based around a much more basic concept, which is LLM, large language model. That is the format in which an AI agent is built. What does that mean? That means that this particular piece of software is built to do something. So what fraudsters often do is they have dev teams, developer teams build AI tools, large language models, which are profiled, in this case, towards online casinos. How? They will screen for how easy is it to KYC, you know, online. Is there any requirement for that? Number two, they will understand, so they will run almost like a kind of a smart contract equivalent as an AI concept. So they will screen, okay, what are the minimum deposits? What's the maximum deposits and withdrawals on this system? What are the RTP rules, return to player? And then on that basis, they will say, let's go. Okay, there's no KYC. We can just spin up a lot of Svetlana Ivanova. We can spin up a lot of Peter Joneses, you know, give it a tweak, and then let's just see how much we can run through it. And if there's then, let's say it's a crypto casino, akin to stake or something like that, although stake are some of the guys who are doing the most, again, retroactively. Then the issue becomes, if you're an online casino accepting crypto, then suddenly you have these huge waves of cash coming in. You are producing, so to speak, documentation for people because the RTP rules via the relevant gaming studios prescribe what it should be, or the relevant operator. So then you are giving people bona fide documentation for how their money was laundered, and then these guys move out. Subsequently, you might be informed, I'm sorry, but you've just laundered $50 million from the Lazarus North Korean hacker group, and you had no safeguards in place to actually screen this in real time, so you have now been abiding money laundering.
Was it Lazarus who the famous hack on stake?
That was also them, yes. But you know what they mainly use, they don't really target online casinos as such, because the amounts for them versus the effort, you know, they sell and build this as a social engineering program. So that was also the trick they did with Bybit. So they say, right, look, instead of trying to hack online casinos, instead of trying to hack crypto exchanges, let's just take it one step up. Let's take it into the most core infrastructure of the industry. Let's take it into smart contracts that these crypto exchanges use in the back end, whereby they do it. And people say, okay, there's a smart contract update. I don't know what the hell I'm doing anyway, because I just press buttons here, so let me just press approve. Oh, what, 1.3 billion is missing in Ethereum? I think I need to go downstairs and get out of here.
I think Scattered Spider was the other hacker group, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
Really appreciate you coming and answering these questions, and hopefully we can do it all again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.
And that's all from ICE 2026 here in Barcelona. Thanks so much to all the guests for taking the time for these interviews. It's been great partnering with Sumsub and their What the Fraud podcast once again. Thanks to Kris for taking on the presenting duties. Please do give us a positive rating or review on your podcast app of choice if you've enjoyed these episodes. And if you'd like to get in touch with the show, you can do that via the contact form at csuitepodcast.com, or you can find me, Graham Barrett, on LinkedIn. But for now, thank you so much for listening, and goodbye.